A widowed nurse adopted a dying dog, never realizing it would lead her to her soulmate. But on that rainy Tuesday in April, as Claire Matthews signed the adoption papers for the frail German Shepherd with sad eyes and only 3 to 6 months left to live, finding love again was the furthest thing from her mind. She was simply trying to fill the hollow spaces grief had carved inside her heart. The shelter volunteer slid the paperwork across the metal desk. "Are you sure about this one? Most people want puppies or at least healthy dogs. Duke here has..." She glanced down at his medical chart with a grimace. "Advanced lymphoma," Claire finished for her. Her fingers absently twisted the wedding band she still wore 2 years after Michael's death. "I know exactly what he has." The volunteer's expression softened. "Of course. Being a nurse and all." Claire didn't explain further. Didn't mention that after watching cancer slowly dismantle her husband's strong body over 18 agonizing months, she felt a strange kinship with this abandoned animal. Didn't say that when she'd first locked eyes with Duke during her volunteer shift at the shelter last week. Something in his dignified suffering had called to her broken places. Instead, she simply signed her name on the final line, the pen's scratch against paper oddly final. "He's all yours," the volunteer said, but Claire was already kneeling beside the dog, who watched her with wary, amber eyes. His gray muzzle had more white than color now, and his once powerful frame was gaunt beneath dull fur. "Hey there," she whispered, extending her hand slowly. "I'm Claire, and I promise whatever time you have left, you won't spend it alone." Duke sniffed her fingers, then pressed his head against her palm with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all his suffering. Claire felt something shift inside her chest, the first fissure in the ice that had encased her heart since Michael's funeral. The drive home was quiet, rain drumming steadily on the roof of her sensible sedan. Duke lay in the back seat, his breathing labored but steady. At each stoplight, Claire found herself checking the rearview mirror, half afraid he might slip away before they even made it home. "Almost there," she murmured, more to herself than to the dog. Her cottage looked smaller somehow as she pulled into the driveway, the blue paint faded and peeling in places she hadn't noticed before. 2 years of grief had narrowed her world to work, sleep, and the relentless effort of breathing through pain. She hadn't had energy for home maintenance, or much of anything else. Getting Duke inside required more effort than she'd anticipated. Though thin, he was still a large dog, and weakness made him clumsy. By the time they reached the living room, they were both panting, and Claire's scrub top was covered in dog hair. "Welcome home," she said, watching as Duke made a slow circle in the center of her living room, sniffing cautiously at furniture legs and the edges of the rug. When he finally settled onto the floor with a heavy sigh, Claire realized she hadn't thought this through. No dog bed, no food bowls, no special diet food for a cancer patient. Tears pricked unexpectedly behind her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm not very good at this. It's been just me for a while now." Duke lifted his head, regarding her with surprising clarity in his tired eyes. "Right." Claire wiped her cheeks, straightening her shoulders. "Supplies? We need supplies." An hour later, she returned from the pet store with more bags than seemed reasonable, a plush orthopedic bed that had cost more than her last pair of shoes, stainless steel bowls, grain-free food the salesperson had recommended for sensitive stomachs, a soft collar, gentle chew toys, and a ridiculous plaid sweater she'd grabbed on impulse because the spring evenings were still cool and Duke had so little body fat to keep him warm. She felt foolish spending so much on a dog who might not live to see summer, but something about the act felt important, sacred even. If she could make his last months comfortable, maybe it would balance the scales for all the times she'd felt helpless at Michael's bedside. Duke seemed to approve. He sniffed each item as she unpacked it, his tail offering a weak thump against the floor when she unfolded the bed in the corner of the living room nearest the heating vent. "Dinner first, then rest," she told him, measuring the recommended portion of kibble into one of the new bowls. She added warm water as the package suggested, creating a soft mash that would be easier on his system. As Claire watched Duke eat, slowly but with obvious appreciation, she realized this was the first time in 2 years she'd prepared a meal for someone other than herself. The simple act of caring for another living creature tugged at something essential that had been dormant inside her. That night, she fell asleep on the couch, unwilling to leave Duke alone his first night in a strange place. Just before dawn, she woke to find him standing beside her, trembling. "What is it, boy?" Claire asked, instantly alert, the nurse in her already cataloging symptoms. Duke whined softly, and she noticed a small puddle on the floor nearby. "Oh, Duke." She stroked his head. "It's okay. Accidents happen." As she cleaned the mess and helped Duke back to his bed, a memory surfaced. Michael during his final weeks, the shame in his eyes when his body betrayed him, and her gentle reassurances that nothing could diminish her love or his dignity. "We've both been through this before, haven't we?" she whispered, settling back on the couch. "It's just bodies being bodies, nothing to be ashamed of." In the pale pre-dawn light, Duke's eyes held such profound understanding that Claire felt seen in a way she hadn't since Michael died. And though the cottage was just as empty as it had been yesterday, something had changed. The silence now felt alive with possibility rather than absence. The first week with Duke established new rhythms in Claire's long static life. Morning medications hidden in peanut butter, slow walks to the corner and back, pausing often to let him rest. Evening rituals of gentle brushing that seemed to soothe them both. At work, her colleagues noticed the change. "You seem different," said Tanya, the charge nurse, as they charted together late one shift. "More tired?" Claire offered with a small smile. "Duke had a rough night." "I was going to say present," Tanya corrected gently. "Like you're actually here with us again." Claire stared at her computer screen, unsure how to respond to the truth in those words. She had been going through the motions for so long. "It's good," Tanya added, touching Claire's arm briefly. "Whatever this dog is doing for you, it's good." What Duke was doing, Claire realized on their 3-week adoption anniversary, was teaching her how to love when loss was guaranteed. Each morning she checked to see if he was still breathing, knowing that one day soon he wouldn't be. And yet, instead of holding back to protect herself, she found herself loving him more fiercely with each passing day. On the morning of their 4th week together, Duke couldn't get up. His back legs trembled uselessly beneath him, and his breathing came in shallow pants. Claire called in sick to work for the first time in years. "It's okay," she whispered, sitting beside him on the floor, stroking his ears the way he liked. "I've got you." The local vet couldn't fit them in until afternoon. Claire carried Duke to the car, alarmed at how much lighter he felt than when she'd first brought him home. In the waiting room, she held his head in her lap, whispering nonsense words of comfort while trying to contain her own rising panic. "Duke Matthews?" called a deep voice. Claire looked up to see a tall man with kind eyes and prematurely silver hair at his temples, wearing a white coat and holding a tablet. "That's us," she said, then clarified, "I'm Claire. This is Duke, Doctor." "Elliot James," he replied, kneeling immediately to Duke's level. "Let's get this handsome guy into an exam room." Claire watched as the veterinarian helped her carry Duke, noting the gentleness in his large hands and the soft, reassuring tone he used when speaking to the dog. Inside the exam room, he conducted a thorough examination, his movements efficient but unhurried. "He's having some internal bleeding, Doctor," James finally said. "It's not uncommon with lymphoma at this stage." "Can you help him?" Claire asked, hating the tremor in her voice. The vet met her eyes directly. "I can make him comfortable and stop this particular bleeding episode. But you know as well as I do." He glanced at her hospital ID badge she'd forgotten to remove. "Nurse Matthews, the cancer is progressing." Claire nodded, swallowing hard. "How long?" "A few weeks, maybe less." "I'm sorry." She had known this was coming from the day she'd adopted Duke. Had told herself repeatedly that she was giving him a good end, not a miracle cure. Still, the finality of the veterinarian's gentle prognosis hit her like a physical blow. "What would you do?" she asked. "If he was yours?" Something flickered in Dr. James's expression, surprise perhaps at being asked, or maybe appreciation for the question itself. "I'd take him home," he said softly. "Give him his favorite foods. Sit in the sunshine with him. And when the bad days outnumber the good ones, I'd say goodbye before suffering became the only thing left." Claire nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. "But today, Doctor," James continued, "I can help him feel better. If you'll allow me to keep him for a few hours, I can give him some fluids, medication for the bleeding, and something for pain." "Yes," Claire managed. "Please. Do you want to stay?" She did, desperately, but the small room suddenly felt too confining, too similar to the hospital rooms where she'd watched Michael slip away, increment by increment. "I should go home and prepare for when he comes back," she said. "Doctor?" James nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll call you when he's ready." Outside in the parking lot, Claire sat in her car and finally allowed herself to cry, deep, racking sobs that bent her forward over the steering wheel. She cried for Duke, for Michael, for all the love that always seemed to end in loss. When the storm passed, she drove to the grocery store and filled her cart with ridiculous things: ground sirloin, roasted chicken, eggs, cheese, all the foods she'd denied Duke on his special diet. If he only had weeks left, she'd make them the most delicious weeks of his life. The call came sooner than expected. Ms. Matthews? Duke is doing much better. You can pick him up any time. At the clinic, Dr. James met her in the exam room, Duke wagging his tail weakly at the sight of her. He's quite a fighter, the vet said, something like admiration in his voice. The bleeding has stopped and he's responded well to the medication. Claire knelt beside Duke, pressing her face into his fur. Thank you, she said, looking up at the doctor. What do I owe you, doctor? James handed her a prescription and care instructions. It's covered. The shelter has an arrangement with us for their palliative adoptions. As Claire gathered Duke's leash, Dr. James cleared his throat. Ms. Matthews... Claire, please. Claire? He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Duke will need a follow-up visit in about a week. But if anything changes before then, call me directly. He handed her a card with his personal number scrawled on the back. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Claire felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. How long had it been since she'd noticed such things? The warmth of another person's skin? The subtle current that could pass between two people in the simplest of touches? I will, she promised, suddenly self-conscious. Thank you for being so kind to him. It's my job. Doctor? James replied, but the softness in his gaze suggested something more. In the following days, Duke rallied remarkably. He ate the forbidden foods Claire prepared with obvious delight, and their walks extended a little further each day. Watching him enjoy these simple pleasures, Claire felt a bittersweet joy expanding within her chest. The pain of impending loss intertwined with the profound gratitude for each borrowed day. On Sunday, they ventured to the small park 3 blocks from Claire's cottage. Duke moved slowly but with determination, his nose working constantly, cataloging the fascinating sense of the outside world. They found a bench in a patch of spring sunshine, and Claire closed her eyes, turning her face to the warmth. "Beautiful day," said a familiar voice. Claire's eyes flew open to find Dr. James standing on the path before them, a border collie at his side. "Dr. James," she said, surprised. "Elliot, please." He smiled. "I'm off duty, and this is my girl, Sadie." The border collie sat primly at his side, her black and white coat gleaming in the sunlight. Duke lifted his head with interest, his tail thumping against the bench. "May I?" Elliot gestured to the empty space beside her. "Of course." As he sat down, Claire became acutely aware of her appearance. Faded jeans, an old sweater, hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. She hadn't bothered with makeup in weeks. Years, really. "How's our patient doing?" Elliot asked, nodding toward Duke. "Better than expected," Claire admitted. "He's eating well and his energy is improved." "I'm glad to hear it." Elliot's smile was warm, genuine. "Sometimes they surprise us." The dogs sniffed each other with cautious interest, Sadie's youthful energy controlled out of obvious respect for Duke's condition. "She's beautiful," Claire said, watching the border collie. "Have you had her long?" 3 years. Found her abandoned on the side of a rural highway, half-starved and terrified of everything. Pride colored his voice. "Now she's the unofficial therapy dog at the clinic. Great with scared animals. You have a thing for rescue cases," Claire observed. Elliot's gaze shifted to her face, thoughtful. "I believe second chances are sacred things." Something about his words, or perhaps the quiet conviction behind them, made Claire's chest tighten. She looked away, focusing on Duke. "How long have you been a veterinarian?" she asked, steering toward safer conversation. 15 years, he replied. "Before that, I was in emergency medicine." "Human emergency medicine?" Claire turned back to him, surprised. "You were a doctor? An MD?" Elliot nodded. "Emergency room. Chicago." "What made you switch?" A shadow crossed his face. "Lost a child patient. 10-year-old boy. Hit and run." He paused, his hand absently stroking Sadie's head. "After that, I couldn't... Everything felt too... raw," Claire finished for him. "Like your skin had been peeled away and everything hurt too much." Their eyes met, understanding passing between them like a current. "Yes," he said quietly. "Exactly like that." They sat in companionable silence, watching an elderly couple feed the ducks at the small pond. Finally, Elliot spoke again. "The shelter told me about your husband when you adopted Duke. I'm sorry for your loss." Claire stiffened slightly. They shouldn't have shared that. Probably not, he agreed. But they worry about their palliative adoptions. Want to make sure the people taking these animals home understand what they're in for? I understand better than most, Claire said, more sharply than she intended. Elliot nodded, not at all offended by her tone. That's why you chose Duke. It wasn't a question, but Claire answered anyway. Yes. No. I don't know, she sighed. I just looked at him and recognized something. The willingness to keep going even when it hurts? Claire glanced at him, startled by his perception. Something like that? Duke chose that moment to stand and stretch, signaling his readiness to continue their walk. As Claire gathered his leash, Elliot and Sadie rose as well. Mind if we join you? He asked. Sadie needs the exercise and He hesitated. I've enjoyed talking with you. Claire hesitated only briefly. We'd like that. They walked slowly, accommodating Duke's pace, talking about everything and nothing, favorite hiking trails, best pizza in town. They disagreed pleasantly, books they'd read recently. By the time they reached Claire's cottage, an hour had passed, and she realized with surprise that she'd laughed several times during their conversation. This is us, she said, gesturing to the little blue house. Elliot looked at the cottage with appreciation. It's lovely. Those hydrangea bushes will be spectacular in another month. They were my husband's pride and joy, Claire said softly. I haven't had the heart to really tend them since he died, but somehow they keep blooming anyway. Elliot nodded, understanding in his eyes. Life is persistent that way. As they said their goodbyes, Claire found herself reluctant to end their encounter. When had she last enjoyed someone's company this much? Duke's follow-up appointment is Wednesday, she said. 3 o'clock? Elliot confirmed with a smile. I remember. On Wednesday afternoon, Claire took special care with her appearance before Duke's appointment. She wore a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes, applied light makeup for the first time in months, and even spritzed on the perfume that had been gathering dust on her dresser. Don't judge me, she told Duke as he watched her from his bed. It's just professional courtesy to look presentable. Duke's expression suggested he wasn't convinced. At the clinic, the waiting room was crowded, and Claire felt a prick of disappointment. Of course, Dr. James Elliot would be busy with other patients. Their Sunday encounter had probably meant nothing to him beyond professional concern for a patient. But when the assistant called Duke's name, it was Elliot who appeared in the doorway, his smile warming as he caught sight of them. Claire, he said, her name sounding different in his voice somehow. And Duke, come on back. The examination was thorough but yielded unexpected results. Duke's lymph nodes had decreased in size, and his blood work showed improvement. I don't understand, Claire said, staring at the chart Elliot showed her. The cancer is still there? Elliot confirmed, but it appears to be in a temporary regression. It happens sometimes. The disease plateaus or even retreats a bit before advancing again. Hope was a dangerous thing, Claire knew. In her years of nursing, she'd seen families grasp at similar temporary improvements, only to have their hearts broken when the inevitable decline resumed. How long? She asked, the same question as before, but weighted differently now. Impossible to say, Elliot admitted. Could be a few extra weeks, could be months. We'll monitor him closely, adjust his medications, and focus on quality of life. Claire nodded, stroking Duke's ears. Thank you. As she prepared to leave, gathering Duke's leash, Elliot seemed to be wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke. Claire, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but would you and Duke like to join Sadie and me this weekend? There's a dog-friendly cafe near the lake. They have these ridiculous puppuccinos that Sadie loves, and the patio is nice this time of year. Claire blinked, surprised by the invitation and her own immediate desire to accept. Like a date? She asked, then winced at her directness. Elliot's smile was both nervous and determined. Yes, like a date. With our dogs. If that's something you might be interested in. Claire couldn't remember the last time someone had asked her out. The wedding ring she still wore usually prevented such overtures. With a start, she realized she'd stopped twisting it anxiously. That nervous habit that had become so automatic she'd ceased noticing it. I'd like that, she said, the words feeling foreign yet right on her tongue. We both would. The cafe date led to a picnic the following weekend, which led to dinner at Elliot's modest but warm home near the veterinary clinic. Each encounter revealed new layers: his passion for wilderness photography, her secret talent for baking, his terrible taste in science fiction movies, her collection of vintage medical texts, and always, their dogs were there. Duke moving more confidently as the days passed, forming an unlikely friendship with the energetic Sadie, who seemed to instinctively understand his limitations. One evening in late May, nearly 2 months after Claire had adopted Duke, she invited Elliot over for dinner. As she chopped vegetables for a stir-fry, he leaned against her kitchen counter, watching her with a warmth that made her both nervous and exhilarated. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. Claire nodded, focusing on the precise movement of her knife through a bell pepper. "Your wedding ring," he began carefully. "I've noticed you still wear it." The knife paused mid-slice. "Yes. May I ask why?" Claire set the knife down, considering her answer. At first it was because taking it off felt like admitting he was really gone. Later it became a habit, I guess. A connection to who I used to be. Elliot nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. "And now?" Claire touched the gold band, cool and familiar against her skin. "Now it feels like a chapter that needs a proper ending before I can start a new one." Their eyes met across the kitchen, the implication of her words hanging between them. "I understand," Elliot said softly. "Some endings need to be marked, honored." "Yes." Claire felt a rush of gratitude for his understanding. That night, after Elliot had gone home, Claire sat on the edge of her bed and slowly twisted the ring off her finger. The pale indentation it left behind seemed both a void and a possibility. She placed the ring in the small porcelain dish on her dresser, where Michael's wedding band had rested since his death. "I'll always love you," she whispered to the empty room. "But I think it might be time to make space for something new." In June, Duke's cancer began to advance again. The decline was gradual but unmistakable: decreased appetite, increased fatigue, occasional bleeding. Claire adjusted his medications with Elliot's guidance, and together they focused on making each day comfortable. "He's had a good run," Elliot said gently one evening as they sat on Claire's porch swing, watching Duke and Sadie rest together on the lawn. 3 months beyond what anyone expected. "Because of you," Claire said, leaning against his shoulder. "No." Elliot's arm tightened around her. "Because of you. The love you've given him, the home you've made. That's what's kept him going." Claire fought back tears. "I'm not ready to say goodbye." "I know," Elliot murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We never are." A week later, Claire woke before dawn to find Duke standing beside her bed, his breathing labored. She helped him outside, supporting his weight as he relieved himself in the dewy grass. When he stumbled trying to climb back up the porch steps, she knew. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, gathering him into her arms. "I've got you." She called Elliot, her voice breaking as she told him what was happening. Within 20 minutes, his car pulled into her driveway. He examined Duke gently on his bed in the living room, confirming what Claire already knew. "He's in pain, Claire. The cancer has likely spread to his organs." Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Can you hear? I don't want to move him." "Of course." Elliot's own eyes were damp as he retrieved his medical bag from the car. Claire lay beside Duke on his bed, cradling his large head in her lap, stroking his ears the way he liked. "Thank you," she whispered to him, "for everything you've given me, for leading me back to life." Duke's eyes, clouded with pain but still so full of devotion, held hers as Elliot administered the injection that would end his suffering. His last breath was a sigh against her hand, peaceful and complete. Afterwards, Elliot held her as she cried, his own tears falling into her hair. Sadie lay beside Duke's still form, whimpering softly. "He changed everything," Claire said when she could speak again. "This dying dog somehow gave me a new life." "That's who he was," Elliot replied gently. "A bridge between what was and what could be." They buried Duke beneath the hydrangea bushes that Michael had loved, the blue flowers just beginning to open in the early summer warmth. Claire placed his collar beside the simple stone marker Elliot had helped her make. In the days that followed, grief came in waves, sharp and consuming, then receding enough to breathe again. But unlike the isolated anguish that had followed Michael's death, this time Claire wasn't alone. Elliot brought dinner, took her for long walks with Sadie, sat with her in comfortable silence when words weren't enough. One evening, about 2 weeks after Duke's passing, they sat together on her porch swing, watching fireflies appear in the gathering dusk. "I have something for you," Elliot said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch. "You don't have to accept it. It's just, I thought it might help." Claire opened the pouch to find a delicate silver charm bracelet with 2 small pendants, a paw print and a heart. "The paw print has some of Duke's ashes inside," Elliot explained softly. The jeweler who makes these works with a lot of pet parents. It's a way to keep him with you." Claire's vision blurred with tears as she held the bracelet in her trembling hand. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Elliot helped her fasten it around her wrist, the silver cool against her skin where her wedding band had once been. "I miss him," she said, touching the paw print charm. "I know," Elliot replied, taking her hand in his. "We always will." "But Claire—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Duke brought us together, but what we've built since then, that's ours. And I hope, it might be something worth keeping." Claire looked at this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly, this kind, patient man who understood loss and healing, who had given her space to grieve without ever making her feel alone. "It is," she said, her voice stronger now. "It absolutely is." When Elliot kissed her, gentle and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded, Claire felt something settle into place inside her, not an ending or a beginning, but a continuation, life flowing forward, carrying the past with reverence while still reaching toward the future. Later that summer, Claire expanded the garden around Duke's resting place, adding plants that attracted butterflies and birds. Sadie often lay in the dappled shade nearby, as if keeping Duke company in her own way. "He would have liked this," Elliot said one afternoon as they worked together in the garden, Sadie chasing a butterfly between the flower beds. "Yes," Claire agreed, brushing dirt from her hands. "He would have." As she surveyed their work, the vibrant flowers, the stone marker, the sense of peace that now permeated this space, Claire felt a profound gratitude well up inside her. For Michael, who had taught her how to love deeply, for Duke, who had shown her how to love again despite certain loss, and for Elliot, who walked beside her now, helping her create something new from the soil of her grief. A widowed nurse had adopted a dying dog, never realizing it would lead her to her soulmate. But looking back now, Claire could see how each painful ending had somehow contained the seeds of a new beginning, if only she had the courage to plant them.